I want to start, though, with your thoughts on the massive events of this week. The Trump peace plan, the release of the hostages, a precarious balance that remains in the Middle East. How do you look at it all?
Yeah, well, first things first, and that Donald Trump deserves great credit for getting those hostages freed. He certainly intervened, and his intervention was effective, and he has more than just a plan to get the hostages out. He has a 20-point peace plan. So we've seen step one, not all of step one at the moment. The living hostages have been released. We're now seeing debate over the dead. And hopefully that gets sorted soon. But the next big thing is the IDF must start to withdraw and Hamas must disarm. Now, we've already seen Hamas executing people inside Gaza. They still have weapons. They weren't disarmed. The IDF couldn't disarm them, so I don't know who is going to do that. And there has to be some force there to keep the peace. So it's the next steps are going to be hard. All the steps on this path are hard.
What about the Trump effect? As you say, he deserves a great deal of praise as we see these really horrific images of public executions by Hamas and people filming them on their phones. It really is just, I was going to say medieval, except for the phones, but it's the images are.
We should never forget this, though. This is the nature of Hamas. This is a suicide cult. And when I say suicide cult, they're not just prepared to die themselves. They're prepared to take everyone with them for their ends. And their ends remain the same. And that is the eradication of the State of Israel, which is why you can understand why the IDF and why the Israeli government was so determined to try and eradicate them. As long as they exist, they're a threat. Now, the problem is, you eradicate Hamas, and you'll get something equally bad in its place. So the sentiment will remain there. So, you know, it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to see how you work out the future of a place like Gaza, while the people who would govern it essentially don't care at all about the people who live within the boundaries.
They don't care. And now the Prime Minister heads to Washington on Sunday, our time. Very quick visit, arrives there Sunday night, US time, meeting Monday, back Tuesday. So very much in for this much anticipated meeting with Donald Trump after what's been a triumphant week for the president.
Yeah, and look, you hope the president's in a good mood and he's willing to hear out his allies, and that Anthony Albanese doesn't find himself in the Oval Office receiving some of the treatment we've seen meted out there. I'm assuming that there'd be some fairly sweaty palms in the Prime Minister's office on the way into this. There'll be a white hot spotlight, at least from Australia, on how that meeting goes. But I would assume that Anthony Albanese will pull it off reasonably well. There are things that the United States needs from us. We are certainly going to be hosting a lot of troops here in Australia. We're putting money towards the defence of the United States. So I think that you know, hopefully, all things being equal, that he emerges unscathed and that the relationship is better for that visit.
The guy from the Labor left who copped so much from the Labor right on Sussex Street. In fact, they pulled his desk out on one occasion, but it's sort of a tough breeding ground. He's dealt with people he doesn't agree with over the years.
I think that Anthony Albanese is actually growing into the role of Prime Minister. You know, I think that people should underestimate him, and I do think that he is finding his feet on this front. So, you know, we wait with bated breath to see what happens, and I'm sure he feels the same way.
Yeah, I reckon he would, although probably reading maybe a crime thriller or something at the moment, because he's on leave this week, a few days off. And it's interesting that he is on a week leave with Jodie Hayden, because this week they won a great backflip, Nadia Comaneci style backflip from Jim Chalmers on superannuation.
Yeah, except Nadia Comaneci landed on her feet, as I recall, and got a perfect 10. I think that unfortunately for the Treasurer, he's landed flat on his face on this one. This was something that he put forward and that he defended stoutly. And I ask a few questions about this, not just of the Treasurer, on the idea of taxing unrealised gains. So this is paper profits that we were talking about, would seem to basically be against the entire idea of fair taxation in Australia. No matter how much money people are making, it was basically being sold on the basis of these are rich people, you don't need to worry about them. What was the principle? It was always the principle of the thing, and the fact that it wasn't indexed, which meant more people would be captured over time. But where is Treasury on all of this? You know, where is the advice out of Treasury? Where's the frank and fearless advice? And I think that Treasury, by the way, is really being degraded as an institution, and we've seen that in the modelling that it's done on net zero, which was trash, and in the fact that it cannot actually say to government, this is a bad idea.
Now, speaking of ideas, James Patterson's speech, I thought it was a really impressive speech. As one of my colleagues said to me, though, should that be the message and the address that the leader gave, as opposed to a senator?
Yeah, well, he's showing leadership himself, isn't he? And if he wasn't in the Senate, he'd be in contention for being the leader of this party. And when James Patterson speaks, he's worth listening to. He always says sensible things. And I think what he said is extremely sensible, which is that they need to find the things that they have in common and to fight on that ground. And there's plenty of things that the moderates and the Conservatives have in common in the Liberal Party. Unfortunately, the dividing line that they have at the moment would see that party ripped in half. And in fact, he mentioned that in the speech. That is not beyond the realms of possibility. I think that the Liberal Party faces an existential choice at the moment about what it does next, and the pathway forward essentially to try and heal it.
Can they heal it?
I don't know. When you talk to some of the people inside that party at the moment, they would appear to think that the biggest problem that they have are other people within their own party rather than the government. And we've seen what's happened in Victoria. They've essentially made themselves unelectable down there because of the same sorts of problems.
Yeah, and that language James Patterson used about Victorianise Australia, he's not just talking about the Liberal Party, he's talking about the Labor hold on that state.
You explain to me, and you watch these things closely, Kieran, how is it that the Allen government is electable next year in Victoria if there was a halfway decent opposition, given all of the issues that there are for them to grasp onto, particularly the crime issue, and of course the fact that that state is going broke, and on an almost daily basis this government shows itself to be incapable of governing properly, and yet it will probably win the next election.
Extraordinary, isn't it? Hard to imagine. Chris Uhlmann, great to see you as always. Thanks.
Thanks, mate.
We'll talk to you next week.